Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the series What If Kid Naruto Awakened the Rinnegan Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
A lone figure, cast into shadow by the setting sun behind him, strode over the crest of a massive sand dune, leaving a trail of slowly disappearing footsteps behind him. A long brown cloak billowed behind him in the warm breeze, shielding his body from the harsh desert winds and sandstorms that were common in the area. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, standing at a somewhat respectable 4 feet and 7 inches for his age. However, there was something about him that drew people's attention if they saw him pass by. Perhaps it was the gleaming Magatama bead dangling from his ear, catching the fading light of the sun. Perhaps it was the flashes of bright blonde hair that would appear from beneath his hood when the wind blew it back. It could have even been the tall shakuju jingling with each step, the staff reaching higher than he himself was tall. It was more than likely the fact that any sand on the wind that came within a meter of his form would bounce back, as if repelled by some invisible force or barrier. The figure came to a halt, resting slightly on the staff, which, despite supporting his weight, did not sink into the sand. He looked around for a moment, the shadows provided by his hood concealing the direction his eyes were looking. Finally, he yanked it back, revealing a shock of bright golden hair tied in the back into the start of a short, spiky ponytail. He took in the scenery around him, vast dunes of golden sand stretching as far as the eye could see, warm but steely violet eyes narrowed into slits. His protective cloak billowed as he stood there, savoring the moment as the scorching day gave way to freezing night, leaving only a brief twilight hour where everything was still and peaceful. Stars began to appear in the sky, emboldened by the sun's slow descent behind the horizon. A warm smile spread across his whiskered cheeks as he reflected on the events that had brought him here, both good and bad. Good morning, Naruto. You look much better now that you've had time to settle and eat. How are you finding the temple so far? The young blonde asked, her face filled with excitement and unending gratitude for the much older monk. It's great. The monks are really nice, and even though Sora can be really annoying sometimes, he is friendly and helps me with stuff when Kairaku is busy. Chukaku ruffled Naruto's hair contentedly. The blonde was so happy about his new life that he didn't care. I'm glad. Just make sure that if there's anything you need or if you ever have any questions or concerns, you come right to me, okay? The small whiskered child nodded excitedly, warming Chukaku's heart to see the boy's features regain their innocence. Master Chukaku, there's something Kairaku-senpai wanted me to talk to you about, the wise monk hummed, and the boy nodded. He said I should be able to turn off my Rinnegan, but I can't pull the chakra out of my eyes, Chukaku said, looking closely at Naruto's eyes and feeling around for his chakra. There was a small buildup behind his eyes, which was obviously what was keeping the Rinnegan active. I don't think there's anything to worry about, Naruto. It's true that Sharingan and Byakugan wielders can deactivate their Daojutsu, but the Rinnegan is far more mysterious than theirs, and for all we know, it can't be deactivated by the user's will. He smiled fondly as he ushered the blonde closer, placing a warm hand on the boy's shoulder. Then again, perhaps you simply lack the control to do so. Remember, you have only recently begun to train in the use and control of your chakra. The boy scowled, but seemed to accept the older man's words. Do you feel any more tired than you did before you got those eyes? Naruto quickly shook his head no. Do they cause you any pain at all? He received another quick head shake to say no. Do you feel at all uncomfortable with people seeing your eyes? Chukaku noticed Naruto pause for a moment before shaking his head more slowly and uncertainly. Chukaku smiled knowingly as he reached for a knee, which was becoming increasingly difficult as he grew older. It's perfectly fine to be afraid of something new, but I hope you understand that the eyes you now have were a gift. One you earned through your hardships. He chuckled slightly as he drew himself back to his feet, ruffling the boy's hair as he did so, earning him a look of annoyance. If the worst happens and you still feel uncomfortable, do what I do, he said childishly. His eyes narrowed as they always did. He was relieved to see Naruto laugh a little, his usual self-assurance returning. Thank you, Master Chukaku. You're really smart, the wise monk said as he escorted the young blonde out of his office. And don't forget about it. Naruto smiled fondly at the warm memory. His eyes crinkled into slits in a way that had always irritated Sora, so of course Naruto had started doing it all the time, mimicking their aging master. He resumed his walk, slowly and carefully descending the dune, the staff in his right hand jingling with each step. He looked up for a moment, noticing the moon beginning to appear in the last rays of sunlight streaming in over the horizon. Naruto sat on the living quarters building's roof, staring up at the sky, specifically the moon. It seemed to emit a thin silver aura in his eyes, which Naruto had always found beautiful since coming to the temple. He wasn't supposed to be up here, and the caretaker was always irritated when he discovered the young blonde on the roof. Despite his inability to sleep, Naruto's dreams were once again invaded by scenes of destruction and wreckage. It was as if he were in a body that wasn't his own, looking down on events over which he had no control. The nightmares didn't come often, but when they did, he couldn't sleep again. Instead, he'd come up here and just sit for a while, thinking about his new life, the future, and the responsibilities his powers and burden had placed on his shoulders. He looked up when he heard soft footsteps on the tiles, expecting Chigasu to chastise him for not respecting the sacredness of the temple roof. Instead, he was surprised to see Sora there, the boy walking over to sit next to the blonde with perfect balance. Nightmare again. Naruto simply nodded, his gaze returning to the mysterious white orb suspended in the sky. The same one. Naruto nodded again, his head drooping and his knees protectively drawn up into his chest. Always, Sora sighed, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, which did slightly relax Naruto. He tensed, pulling away from the contact and turning his gaze away from Sora, instead following a crack along a roof tile. "I'm sorry, Sora," the blue-haired pseudo-Jinchuriki said, looking around, surprised by Naruto's cold tone. "For what?" The blonde sighed deeply as he turned back to face the future, this time looking out over the temple and into the surrounding forests. "It's been almost 3 months and I still haven't found anything to help you. I haven't kept my promise to you." Sora blinked for a moment before a sad smile crept across his features as he, too, looked out over the temple, in the same vague direction as his friend. "I never asked you to make that stupid promise, and what you're trying to do should be impossible anyway." Naruto scoffed, his eyes narrowing in a challenging manner. Like the sage creating the moon. Naruto laughed, but was taken aback when Sora suddenly lay back on the roof, staring up at the distant disk. "Hey, what if he really did it?" Naruto blinked before collapsing next to his friend. "Then he'd be far more powerful than even the legends make him out to be," Sora said, pulling his hands up to rest beneath his chin. "I'm going to be like that one day," he thought as he heard Naruto scoff next to him and jump to his elbows, a tick mark forming on his temple. "What's so funny?" Naruto grinned as he continued to stare at the moon, completely unconcerned about his friend's looming fist. "Please, if you ever get that powerful, I'll be able to move the moon around with a flick of my wrist," Sora scoffs, his anger quickly turning to amusement as he flops back down onto his back. "Right, moving the moon?" he chuckled to himself. "What was I thinking?" Naruto finally looked around, the challenge clearly sparkling in his eyes as his earlier sadness faded. "You're on." Sora blinked in surprise, an incredulous expression on his face as he stared in shock at his blonde friend. "That wasn't a challenge, Naruto," snorted Naruto, crossing his arms and looking away haughtily, impersonating the blue-haired boy. "Just because you know you're going to lose," Sora retorted, raising his fist and pointing accusingly at the blonde. "I'll never lose to you." He blinked in surprise as Naruto burst out laughing, his anger fading as he realized it was all a joke. They were back on their backs a few minutes later, just staring up at the sky. "So, how would you go about it?" Sora just looked around, puzzled, at the blonde with the unusually thoughtful expression. "How would you move the moon?" Sora shrugged, blinked slowly. "I don't know, but Master Chukaku says that if there's a problem we can't solve, as long as we have friends, they'll be there to lighten the burden," Naruto said fondly, a small chuckle gracing his lips. "Yeah, I guess you're right," he trailed off, blinking once, twice, and a few more times before suddenly shooting up into a sitting position. Sora swears he saw cogs turning in the boy's head before Naruto shot to his feet, his eyes wide with excitement. Before Sora could even ask, both his hands were grabbed, pulling him into a standing position as Naruto began to bounce around the rooftop with him. The blue-haired boy blinked before a small blush appeared on his nose and a rather haughty smile appeared on his features. When he looked up, Naruto had vanished. The pseudo-Jinchuriki looked around, but his blonde friend had vanished. Sora froze abruptly, his head slowly swiveling to look at a furious Chigasu holding his almost infamous wooden spoon in one hand as he taped it irritably against his forearm. As he backed away from the clearly enraged caretaker, Sora began to stutter before coming to a halt at the edge of the roof. "Well, as you can see, Chigasu-senpai. It's as you can see, it's like dammit Naruto." Naruto laughed fondly at the memory as he began to climb another large dune, neither the steep climb nor the loose footing seeming to bother him. He had replaced his hood, the shadows once again falling over his face, as well as pulling up a scarf to cover his mouth and whisker marks. It was beginning to grow cold as the sun vanished, the heat in the ground quickly dispersing and rising up into the air. "Would you please, Naruto, calm down?" You'd think you were the one who finally got rid of their inner demon, Sora said, his voice trembling with excitement. It was finally happening. After Naruto had run off and left him on the roof to deal with a certain angry caretaker, Sora had gone out to find him. Apparently something about their conversation had given Naruto an idea on how to finally free Sora of the Kyuubi's chakra. The main problem with removing a Biju from the host was that such a large amount of such potent and corrosive chakra being channeled through a specific spot on the Jinchuriki, namely the seal, caused an overload of the chakra network in that area, resulting in a chain reaction that killed the hosts. Unfortunately, most unsealing methods did exactly that. They unsealed the binding on the Biju, which meant the chakra would be freed all at once in one place. Using Naruto's Preta path, they had a unique opportunity to draw out the chakra directly from as many different places as Naruto could make clones. Of course, it would still hurt, but with the extraction being spread out, it wouldn't be fatal or even all that damaging. Chukaku had at first seemed hesitant when Naruto brought this before him, but ultimately he believed it was Sora's choice. Overjoyed at the chance to finally be rid of what he firmly saw as a curse and burden, the blue-haired boy practically jumped at the chance. Of course, just to be safe, Naruto had spent a few weeks practicing with his Preta path to make sure everything was ready. It would do no good to draw out Sora's chakra with the Kyuubi's. What the heck is taking so long? One of Naruto's 4 clones looked up in irritation, the others following suit from afar in a slightly creepy way. The shared vision may have been useful in a fight, but the pseudo-Jinchuriki always found it strange when the multiple blondes would do things in unison. But that was to be expected when they were all essentially the same person with the same sight. Be patient. You've been waiting 4 months for this. You can wait a few more minutes for the monks to finish their seal. Sure enough, a few monks were drawing out a large and powerful containment seal on the ground, more for comfort than actual protection. If worst came to worst, it wouldn't hold out against a Kyuubified Sora for long. Yeah, speak for yourself. I can't wait to be finally free. Naruto just smiled at his friend, who had become increasingly anxious over the past week or so. He was happy to see his friend so excited, but he also thought it would be rather strange after all was said and done. He had always kind of enjoyed knowing that he and Sora shared the same burden. It was something that connected them, an unspoken bond of understanding. Alright, let's get started. Sora matched the blonde's grin as they moved to the center of the ceiling array. Naruto quickly created 10 shadow clones, most of which immediately closed their eyes to spare Naruto a rather intense headache. The ones that didn't led their clone brethren into a small ring with Sora at the center, each finding a spot to hold onto Sora with both hands. Are you prepared? Without further ceremony, Naruto closed his eyes and began to focus on his path, feeling past Sora to the seal on his stomach. The feeling of the Kyuubi's chakra was unmistakable within the seal, flowing quickly and erratically without a proper conscious mind to guide it. Naruto latched onto it, as did his 10 clones, and slowly they began to draw it out. The change was immediate as the virulent red chakra began flowing through Sora, pushing his less potent chakra aside. He was enshrouded by a familiar cloak, this time only one tail swaying behind him as Naruto held back the rest of the chakra, managing its flow through Sora and into him with care. Naruto noticed the red seep into his friend's eyes as soon as it happened, but he couldn't speed it up because doing so would begin to burn away Sora's chakra network. He just gritted his teeth, hoping he could finish before anything bad happened. He should have known it would be a tall order as Sora began to thrash inside his circle of blondes. First the tail, then the clawed hands. Naruto couldn't risk them bursting too soon, as that would result in an influx of chakra that could be dangerous for him. He was so focused on drawing out the chakra and keeping his clones from bursting under Sora's wild swings that he missed the bubbling red tail suddenly lunging at him from below. His cry echoed into the courtyard as the tail pierced his side, the burning from the vile chakra almost as bad as the wound itself. Sora, hurry up. Don't give up too soon. We're almost there. The wound was already closing as the chakra he absorbed went to work healing it. But a clone was less fortunate as the tail was brought around again, slamming straight through its head. The original blonde winced at the influx of memories and chakra but held out just long enough for the last of the burning red cloak to ebb away. Naruto was able to give Sora one last smile before falling backwards, exhausted. You did, after all, keep your promise. Naruto realized what he was doing and stopped rubbing his side. The wound hadn't even scarred, but he remembered it vividly enough. He hadn't woken up for a whole day after that, the strain on his body from the extra Biju chakra proving too much for him. If it hadn't been for his Preta path and the seal siphoning off the excess, he would have died. As it was, neither he nor Sora received any lasting. Something moving caught his attention, and as he looked around, he noticed the bushy tail of a desert fox just disappearing over the peak of the dune he was climbing, which immediately made him think of the other fox in his life as he looked down at his stomach. The small blonde sat calmly in a meditative position just outside the bars of the Kyuubi's cage, far enough away that its claws couldn't reach him. The great fox was in its usual position deep within its cell, but every few minutes or so it would crack a single eye, observing its vessel with mild curiosity. "What are you doing, Ninja?" Naruto didn't open his eyes. He didn't even move. He just sat there calmly, focusing on the feel of his chakra through his body. And after about 5 minutes, during which the great beast grew increasingly irritated to the point of banging against the bars, he spoke. "I'm meditating." A massive red eye narrowed in indignation far above the peaceful human, its 9 tails swaying dangerously. But the blonde was unfazed. He was too used to the Kyuubi's hollow attempts at intimidation to notice. "I see that, Ninja," Naruto said, smirking slightly at the corners of his mouth, but he didn't move. "Then why did you inquire?" His response was a strong gust of wind, which irritated the Kyuubi. "Do you enjoy testing my patience, Ninja?" The normally loud and domineering voice was reduced to a low menacing growl that frightened the meditating monk in training. "I'll admit, it's pretty amusing." The blonde finally let his hands rest at his sides as he looked up, his face adopting the same expression as his master with a serene smile and narrowed eyes, a win-win situation. "And my name is Naruto." This time he didn't even get an immediate response, just the background sounds of the enormous tail swishing back and forth. "All you ninja look alike. Why should I concern myself with such petty trivialities?" Naruto shrugged nonchalantly, his gaze drawn away for a moment as if pondering the obviously rhetorical question. What is common courtesy? All he got this time was an indignant snort from the great fox as it lay down on its stomach, head resting on its paws. "Is there any particular reason for this visit, Ninja? Do you not remember how all of our past encounters have gone?" Naruto remembered coming into the seal, attempting to gain a sliver of insight into the Kyuubi's motives or thoughts only to be rebuked and occasionally, forcefully ejected from the seal. He had gotten better at resisting it though once he discovered Kyuubi was using his chakra to push him out. It was a simple task to simply absorb it instead. "I wanted to ask you about the sage." The Kyuubi simply growled at him, which would have been extremely threatening if not for the massive bars that separated the two. "You once said I couldn't compare to him. That means you must have known him." When Naruto looked up, he saw the Kyuubi look away, off into the darkness of the cell. "What exactly is Ninja? Have you given up on your ridiculous attempt to understand me?" The great fox frowned as the blonde simply grinned back. It unnerved the Biju to see someone so calm stand, or sit, before him. The last person to do so was long dead, and the powerful being had to remind itself of that fact as it gazed down at the smiling blonde. "Oh no, I never give up on anything, but I think you'll talk to me when you're ready," he continued, ignoring the indignant grunt of denial that followed. "It would be interesting to learn more about the original wielder of my eyes. How else am I supposed to honor his memory?" He blinked as he noticed the great beast was strangely quiet, with not even a dismissive growl thrown his way. "If that is your wish, then you should simply give up now. The sage of the 6 paths was a god amongst you ninja. You will never be able to attain even a sliver of the power that man wielded in a single hand." Naruto actually gawked for a moment. That had been the most passionate thing he had heard from the Kyuubi that had not been out of anger. The fox seemed to realize this as well and quickly resets its features into the usual scowl. "It sounds like you admire him," the Kyuubi said, its slitted pupils narrowing slightly. But there was no denying grunt or snort. "He had my respect," Naruto said again, surprised by this conversation. "So there is a side of you that isn't just rage and anger," the Kyuubi growled deeply, glistening white teeth bared. Naruto filed the sage away as a touchy subject for the fox before standing up, dusting himself off despite the floor being immaculately clean. "Well, I better be going now. Don't think this is over." The Kyuubi's response was to get back up and slink off into the darkness. "Whatever you say, Ninja." With a satisfied nod, Naruto took another look around the room before disappearing. After that, Naruto gradually managed to wheedle information out of the rather petulant fox. No matter how indignant the Kyuubi appeared, it was fairly easy for Naruto to rile it up enough to get it to let slip some information. It was all about pushing the buttons necessary to irritate it, something the blonde was exceedingly skilled at. According to the Kyuubi, the sage was a very different person from Naruto. He was incredibly calm and level-headed, always having a plan for pretty much any situation, and when he didn't, he easily made up for it in pure unadulterated power. However, the great fox admitted the two had their similarities, their attitudes towards never giving up for one. Naruto sighed as he began the long trudge up yet another dune, All he had on this monotonous trek through the shifting, scorching sands were his thoughts and memories. A light jangling from his shakuju suddenly broke his concentration, a soft smile gracing his lips as he looked at it. To his eyes it glowed with its own inner light, a pale blue that always managed to calm his swirling thoughts. "I'm going to miss you, man," Naruto said sadly to his friend as the two hugged each other. "I'll miss you too." The blonde chuckled as they pulled away, his hand still on the former shoulder. "Jinchurikis, but you know me, I'll be back. It's only a few years." Suddenly, the two felt hands on their shoulders, and when they looked around, they saw Kairaku smiling fondly at them. Indeed, it is always a joyous occasion when a monk chooses to go on a journey to find themselves, but it is also filled with much melancholy. Nonetheless, it is a necessary part of becoming a monk that we must all go through at some point. When Naruto returns, he will not only be stronger, but wiser. The blonde smiled appreciatively at his senpai, knowing that when he returned from this trip, he wouldn't have to call him that any longer, while Sora gave a small, but playful snort. "PFFT, Naruto, become wiser, you would have an easier time getting that spoon away from Chigasu." He turned back around, pulling something from his robe pocket. "But seriously, you better become stronger, man. I wouldn't want you to come back and be too easily defeated by me," he said as he opened his hand, revealing a small bead shaped like a comma with a hole in the rounder part. "Wow, thanks Sora," he said, quickly clipping the small earring to his ear, the small white bead catching the sun for a moment. "I appreciate it." He really did. It was a thoughtful gift meant to bring good luck on travels. There's something else, young Naruto-kun," the blonde said, turning to see Chukaku standing behind Kairaku, not sure when the old head monk had arrived. The two frequently walk hand in hand. "Along that line, I'd like to give you something that I hope provides you with even the slightest protection." Suddenly, the man produced a long wooden case from seemingly thin air, holding it out to the blonde before opening it. "What is a shakuju?" Naruto was perplexed because it was unusual for a monk in training to be given his own staff. It was usually given to them after their self-pilgrimage. "Do you not recognize it?" Looking closer, the blonde gasped in surprise as he did, in fact, recognize the old wooden staff. With a slightly shaking hand, he reached out and took the shakuju in his hand, not noticing as the monks looked on in interest. As he gripped the sturdy staff, he immediately felt a pull on his chakra as it began to slowly drain into the weapon. "Tool. Who works for the sage? You're giving it to me." Chukaku nodded with a calm smile after observing that the staff had no negative effect on the boy. "Of course, it's part of your legacy. Treat it well," the young Jinchuriki said, stepping forward and wrapping his small arms around the old monk in a warm hug. "Thank you, thank you, Jiji, for everything you've done for me." Chukaku gently rubbed the boy's hair, his eyes opened for the first time because he didn't want to miss a single second of the departure of a boy he had come to regard as a surrogate grandson. "You are most welcome, Naruto-kun." Again, Naruto schooled his face into his usual serene mask as he climbed over the peak of what seemed like his 1000th dune. He was truly sad leaving the temple behind him, but he knew that was not the last he would see of it. However, that wasn't to say he wasn't excited. It was as though he was finally starting a new chapter in his life. There, far off on the horizon, as if to cement that idea, was a small Sunagakure no Sato was approaching. The great sandstone walls of Sunagakure no Sato rose up high above the young monk, in stark contrast to the surrounding desert. He was relieved to finally arrive at the village, though calling it that would be a stretch given the sheer size of the ninja capital. He remembered Kairaku testing his and Sora's nature affinities. Sora's came up as wind, which was surprising given the rarity of wind users outside of Kei's no Kuni. Of course, that paled in comparison to the surprise that Naruto was gifted with all 5 nature affinities, in what appeared to be equal measures, a feat considered biologically impossible by all chakra experts in the known world. Naruto, being the easiest to control, began training his fire affinity first, taking to it surprisingly quickly. Not to be outdone, Sora began his own elemental training, though Naruto didn't get to see the fruits of that effort as they had both only begun a month before Naruto left. However, the blonde managed to surprise Kairaku when he politely declined being taught any fire jutsu. Honestly, it reminded Naruto too much of what his life might have been like in Konoha, which brought him back to memories of the day he lost everything he cared about, which was just too painful for the blonde. His Rinnegan abilities were different, they were just as much a part of him as the actual eyes were themselves. and he felt obligated to learn and understand them better. The exercise involved starting a small fire in the middle of a leaf and controlling the flames so they didn't burn outwards, with the added incentive that if you couldn't do it, you burned your fingers. Sora felt less obligated to do it the slow way, so he used the useful jutsu in abundance to complete his own wind manipulation training, splitting a leaf. Standing there now, with the sun bearing down on him and the massive walls blocking a lot of the wind, fire-natured chakra wasn't all that helpful. He gave a small smile to the shinobi standing at the gate, who simply passed his rather bored gaze over the monk. Once he had deemed him simply a monk posing no immediate threat to Suna's safety, he handed Naruto a few forms to fill out. He was quickly ushered through with a group of merchants, a few of whom were obviously not locals as they looked about ready to pass out from the heat, and he felt especially sorry for a particularly large man wearing a lot of jewelry and finery that looked positively sweltering. But those thoughts vanished once he was in the village as he gazed at the incredible sight. The forests surrounding the shinobi stronghold were lush and vibrant, as well as beautiful when they caught the light during a sunset. But its beauty was incomparable to Suna's purely because the two places were so vastly different. Where Konoha had tall modern buildings nestled amongst more traditional estates, giving it a very multicultural appeal, Suna was slightly different. All of the buildings were made of the same material, a multi-purpose sandstone that looked as solid as any good concrete or stone. But the uniformity ended there. Each building looked as unique as it could, most of which were cylindrical or even spherical. Great walkways rose from the ground to straddle the sky, providing even more ways for civilians to get around the village. People bustled through the streets, vendors peddled their wares to passers-by, and shinobi were going about their business or relaxing in various cafes and restaurants, obviously between missions or training. It brought a smile to the young monk's face that even hundreds of miles away these people were still recognizable as just that, people. Of course, humans were rude, as evidenced by an impatient merchant jostling Naruto as he hurried by, forcing the young monk to steady himself with the shakuju. Ignoring the man, Naruto wandered the village for a while, taking in the sights of the vibrant and friendly people. He wasn't used to the slight inclinations of the head and the occasional wave that were tossed his way as people passed him by. He became hungry after a while, so he stopped in what appeared to be a small park. There were swings and slides and other equipment associated with children, but strangely there seemed to be nobody around. He took out a sealing scroll from one of his pockets, unsealing the box inside. Absently, he noted he was running out of the rations Kairaku had given him at the start of his journey. He briefly considered what he was supposed to do for money now that he was outside of the temple. In Konoha, he had received a weekly stipend from the Hokage after leaving the orphanage. It wasn't much, and he was frequently overcharged or refused service in most places, but it was enough to get by. He guessed he would have to do jobs for people to earn food or money once his ran out. He realized with a slightly raised brow that this must be Suna's Shinobi Academy when he noticed a few shuriken and kunai holsters on the young students, probably blunted, and he watched with amusement as the kids began to play in the park during what was obviously a recess from their studies, but sighed as he realized he too would be doing this had he stayed in Konoha. He didn't miss the casual glances he was getting from the nearby Chunin instructor, but they quickly stopped when Naruto made no move to do anything. Eventually he got up, broken from his melancholy as the children were ushered back inside by a loud bell that clearly marked the end of their break. He walked past the front of the academy, intent on finding somewhere he could get some food or work. He walked calmly towards the voices, quieting the jingle of his shakuju with a thin application of chakra through the staff, surprised to find 3 boys who were probably last-year academy students all surrounding a younger girl who seemed to be from the year he had just seen playing outside. None of them seemed to notice him and he didn't bother hiding himself, just leaning on the alley wall and listening in with interest. "Please, I have to get back to class or sensei will be angry with me," said the girl, who had brown hair that hung straight around her head down to her shoulders and bowed her head submissively to the 3 older boys. "What's the point, you say? It's not like you could ever be a shinobi." Naruto raised an eyebrow. The boy had a contemptuous sneer that the blonde recognized from her childhood. "Yeah, what kind of ninja is afraid of weapons?" As if to emphasize his point, one of the others pulled a kunai from his pouch, but this one gleamed in the weak light, the edges very sharp and deadly, and the effect on the girl was instantaneous. She tried to back away from the boy with the kunai but was blocked by the other 2. Naruto was simply appalled. Was this how shinobi of the same village treated their own? "Perhaps we should correct your little fear of weapons with a demonstration, eh? Let us show you just how effective they can be." Suddenly the girl was grabbed from behind in a strong hold, one arm thrust out in front of her as the boy walked closer, kunai glinting ominously. However, before the sharp edge could be applied to her skin, the small weapon suddenly flew from his hands as if drawn by some invisible force. When the three turned in the direction it had flown, they saw Naruto standing there, the kunai in his hand as he observed it idly. Did you know the kunai was once used as a gardening tool? They were used in both royal gardens and monks' temples, and were a fantastic multi-purpose tool for levering and digging. It was the ninja who turned it into a weapon. It was simple to make and sharpen. Suddenly, a simple gardening tool had been transformed into a lethal weapon. Naruto looked up as he began to bend the kunai in his hands, using chakra to increase his strength. What the hell are you? The tallest of the three boys stepped forward to face the newcomer, obviously the trio's leader or the resident hothead, and Naruto simply chuckled as he let the kunai fall to the sandy ground, the weapon bent out of any kind of useful shape. Me, I'm just a simple traveling monk, the boy sneered, forgetting the earlier impossible feat as he dismissed the boy smaller than him. You're just a runt, go away. We are 5th year academy students, almost genin. Naruto sighed exaggeratedly, taking advantage of the opportunity to rest his staff against the alleyway wall. I weep for your village the day people like you are legally allowed to become shinobi. The boy growled angrily, enraged that some brat kid would speak to him like that, and drew out a second kunai as Naruto dropped back into a taijutsu stance none of them recognized. The almost genin laughed at the blonde. Are you going to try to fight me? You're just a monk, I don't even recognize that stupid stance. Naruto let a small smile slip across his lips, slightly unsettling the boys who were still holding the girl. This is the Mizu no Mai starting stance. I'm not surprised you don't recognize it. I'm still developing it after all. As he spoke, his head lowered and he brought his arms up, one in front of his body and one behind, so that his entire body appeared to be slightly tilted forwards, both palms facing upwards, and his legs were also spaced out in front and behind, almost like he was bowing. Naruto waited until the last second, his eyes still closed, before suddenly moving out of the way. His entire body span, so close to the other boy they could have held a piece of paper between them. As he did, one hand grabbed a hold of the wrist holding the kunai before sliding under the boy, still in one clean sweeping motion. What kind of pitiful move was that? It wasn't even painful. If that's all you intend to do, then suddenly, the boy began swaying in his feet, exhausted, as if he had been fighting for hours rather than seconds. Hey, what did you? He didn't have a chance to finish before his eyes rolled back and he dropped boneless to the ground. And his two friends abruptly released the girl as they backed away from Naruto, not wanting to mess with someone who could take out their leader in a single move. He'll be fine in about an hour, he's just tired. Even so, you should take him now and leave, I don't want to fight you. Without waiting for him to finish, the two boys dashed forward, grabbed their friend, and dashed away, leaving Naruto alone in the alley with the girl. Thank you, Monk-san, Naruto said simply, his almost closed eyes widening as he waved his hand dismissively. No worries, The girl took the hint as she moved closer, her head finally rising for the first time to reveal a rather cute face and shining black eyes, both of which seemed to be common in Suna. Matsuri, Naruto said again as he reached for his shakuju, a little unnerved by the girl's expression of adoration. Well then, no problem Matsuri, I'm happy to help out. He turned to go but thought better of it as he turned back to face the smaller girl. Just remember, a weapon does not make a shinobi. Find your own path in life, and never let others tell you that what you're doing is wrong. With that last piece of advice, the blonde turned to leave, only to feel a small hand grab his own. Wait, I don't know your name, the blonde said, her smile reaching his eyes. It's Naruto, he said, finding the admiring stare slightly disconcerting because it was so foreign to him. How can I express my gratitude? Naruto placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, unintentionally reading her chakra, and was pleasantly surprised to discover she had good reserves for a 10-year-old, despite being only a year younger than him. You don't, as I said, I was happy to help, he said as he walked away, the jingling of his shakuju echoing in the alley. Naruto spent the next few days in Suna seeing the sights and doing odd jobs to earn some money. At night, he would sleep in a small out-of-the-way temple near the edge of the village, the kindly master reminding him a lot of Chukaku. Right now he was standing outside a very large and very ornate building, one of the few that weren't cylindrical or spherical. This was the purpose of his pilgrimage. Each monk chooses something they want to discover or learn about and devotes themselves to it until they are satisfied. Some chose to ponder the mysteries of life and existence, while others took more philosophical routes delving into human nature. Naruto had chosen to try and understand the nature of chakra itself, hoping to one day surpass him. That was why he needed to travel, to gain perspective. Information tended to be heavily biased towards those who wrote it. That was why he needed to gain a broader understanding of the world, to see the bigger picture from as many angles as possible. He couldn't think of a better place to start than a library, especially one in a ninja village where chakra is part of daily life. He was not a Suna resident nor a shinobi in their ranks, so the information was off limits to him. Of course, if he tried to henge and was caught, he could be severely punished under suspicion of being a spy. He sighed as he sat outside on the steps leading up to the library, watching as a chameleon slowly made its way up the wall, stopping occasionally to blend in. As he stood up, a thought struck him, and he quickly made his way back through the streets towards the academy. "Hey Matsuri," the young brown-haired girl exclaimed as a voice appeared out of nowhere, and she sighed as she turned around, a smile spreading across her face as she realized who it was. "Naruto-san." The blonde simply chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head, his eyes still closed. "It's just Naruto. How are things going for you?" The girl beamed, looking nothing like the shy and timid girl she had been before. "Great. Those bullies abandoned me and have not bothered me since. I think they think you'll come back to finish them if they do," Naruto replied with a grin of his own. "That's good," the girl said, her confidence dwindling as she nervously placed her hands behind her back and looked down at her feet. Naruto-san, I want to do what you told me, find my own way to do things without weapons." She clenched her eyes shut for a moment before shooting them open as she brought her hands around to clasp in front of her almost pleadingly. Naruto's smile softened as he gently patted Matsuri's shoulder, the girl knowing exactly what that meant. "Sorry Matsuri, that style relies on a special ability of mine that other people can't do. Otherwise it is mostly about dodging attacks while redirecting the force of blows in a harmless way. Plus, I haven't even finished it yet, it's part of a larger taijutsu style I'm developing." While Matsuri looked sad, she also had a slightly odd gleam in her eyes. Developing a taijutsu style was supposed to be one of the most difficult things a shinobi could do, and a boy who looked only a year older than her and wasn't even a ninja was doing just that. "Oh, okay then." She looked down, and Naruto couldn't bear seeing her dejected expression. It was heartbreaking. "But wait a minute, that's not all I could teach you." Naruto nervously rubbed his head, wondering how Matsuri had managed to flip the conversation around. He was supposed to be the one asking a favor of her. "Yeah, I knew." He thought for a moment about what he could teach her before a sly grin spread across his face. "How about I teach you this?" He quickly walked to a nearby wall before placing one foot on it and simply climbing. "Wow, that's incredible." The blonde just grinned as he jumped back down before frowning as Matsuri's emotions flipped back to saddened. "But you've already done so much for me. How can I pay you back now?" Finally, Naruto cracked a genuine smile as he wrapped one arm around the smaller girl's shoulders. "Well, now that you bring it up." Naruto was meditating in a park, enjoying the feel of a new space to relax in. He couldn't quite describe it, but the area felt different to his home at the Fire Temple. Not in the traditional sense that it was hotter or just looked different, it actually physically felt different. He remembered the analogy he had given the head monk about the green chakra he could see in the stones and plants. He was disturbed from his thoughts as he saw Matsuri enter the park. That was another thing. When he meditated like that, focusing solely on Naruto-san, he shocked Matsuri once more when he suddenly dropped down next to her from the branch he had been meditating on, upside down. But she didn't yelp out loud like the last time. "Matsuri, I already told you to just call me Naruto." The girl waved him off, which amused Naruto. It appeared she had regained some confidence, which he only suspected was good for her. "Look, I've got scrolls for you." She quickly produced a set of scrolls for him, 6 in total, from a satchel hanging from her shoulder. "My brother was really surprised when I asked him to get them for me." Matsuri seemed to almost sparkle with happiness as Naruto gave her a warm smile. "Thank you very much, Matsuri. This means a lot to me and I couldn't have done it without you." It wasn't entirely true, but the blonde didn't think it would be a bad idea to stoke the girl's self-confidence just a little. He made a hand sign and suddenly a perfect replica of himself appeared, taking the scrolls from the girl. Matsuri just gawked at the very much solid clone the monk had made. "Wow, can you teach me that?" Naruto chuckled as he started going through some hand seals. "Not really, it requires a lot of chakra, otherwise it's dangerous," Matsuri retorted as Naruto finished his jutsu, placing his hand over the scrolls as another, identical set poofed into existence. Matsuri wasn't surprised anymore after seeing what Naruto could already do. Making clones of the scrolls didn't seem like a stretch. "Please, my sensei claims I have the most chakra for my age in our year." For the first time in his young life, Naruto was subjected to the dreaded female secret technique, puppy dog eyes no jutsu, which was too much for a young boy with little experience with the opposite sex due to his zero interaction with his peers followed by 4 years in a temple. If you really promise to be careful with it and not use more than one at a time until you're sure you're ready, then I guess he was abruptly tackled to the ground by an overjoyed Matsuri. Her arms wrapped around him in her attempt at a crushing hug, which Naruto found strangely nice. He had been hugged before, but never by a girl. It was certainly different. Many thanks. Everyone will be jealous when I show them what I'm capable of. Naruto chuckled slightly as the girl finally got off of him, blushing slightly when she realized what she had been doing. Humility is the sign of a truly great person. Matsuri's blush deepened as she shyly looked away. Plus, I would really appreciate if you tried to keep it as secret as possible. The technique is not supposed to be known by Suna Shinobi. If you go around showing people, they will get suspicious of where you learnt it. I don't think they'll believe a wandering monk was kind enough to teach it to you, Matsuri said. So Naruto stood up and drew her with him, surprising her with his strength. But, in any case, how about I show you the first one? For the shadow clone technique, you'll need as much chakra control as you can muster. Naruto spent nearly a month teaching Matsuri. He had to be very careful when teaching her the shadow clone jutsu. It turned out that even after learning the surface clinging technique, she had difficulties, so he went on to teach her how to walk on water. After that, he was very grateful for his ability to pass on his chakra to other people, as Matsuri could barely make 2 clones in a row before nearly passing out from chakra exhaustion. They didn't get a lot of practice time because of her going to the academy and her responsibilities at the orphanage, something the two shared in common. It was enlightening for Naruto to finally gain a friend around his age besides Sora, and talking with a girl proved to be very new to him. With Sora, he shared a very competitive rivalry. Even the smallest thing could set the two off. He was sitting in one of the many training grounds outside of Suna village, but still within the mighty walls. He had to be there because it was one of the few grounds with trees that could grow leaves in the desert's harsh climate. The scrolls Matsuri had brought him proved to be very interesting, especially the ones about wind chakra. Right now, he was practicing the leaf cutting exercise. He could already do it, but he was working on cleaning up his cut into a perfect line. It wasn't like he could move on to the next stage anyway. There were no waterfalls within the village. Suna Shinobi wanting to master wind chakra were taken to a special oasis somewhere that was a secret. He had also looked for any hint of this other chakra he kept feeling. Even sitting in a sandy, almost lifeless field like this one, he could see the faintest hints of that green chakra. Unfortunately, nothing like that was mentioned in any of the scrolls Matsuri had brought him. He had found references to the life force of the world, but that didn't sound quite right. He was sure what he saw was a type of chakra, and life force was supposed to be very different. He was startled out of his thoughts and his training when he noticed a set of eyes on him. Looking up, he saw a young girl, perhaps 2 or 3 years older than him, with sandy blonde hair that matched the color of the dusty ground beneath them and was pulled into 4 spiky ponytails, not dissimilar to his. She wore a long white shirt that almost looked like a dress on her, loosely tied around her waist by a light blue sash. "Hey, who are you and why are you on my practice field?" Naruto locked his gaze on the older girl for a moment, though she couldn't tell because his eyes were so narrowed. He rose slowly from his meditative state, made a small bow to the girl, and turned to leave. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize this area was taken. I'll leave you." He continued to walk away, the only sound in the relatively small space being the jingling of his shakuju. The girl just looked perplexed at the strange blonde's very polite apology and watched as the monk walked towards the training ground's exit. Her eyes widened when she noticed the many split leaves all over the ground, as well as a few burnt ones. Wait, Naruto was taken aback when he felt a hand wrap around his arm and pull him back. She smiled at him as she held one of the many split leaves in front of him, a small recognizable sparkle in her eyes. "You're practicing wind manipulation?" Naruto asked, his usual smile still on his face. He crouched to the ground, picking up a leaf and holding it out to the girl. To her surprise, it spit straight down the middle, the cut still slightly jagged, which irritated Naruto slightly. "Oh wow, that was really good. Baki-sensei told me about it, but he won't let me try it yet." She blushed as she looked down at her feet, noticing the newly split leaf float to the ground as Naruto released it. "Sometimes, though, I sneak out here to try it, but all I ever get is a tiny cut," Naruto observed as a mildly suspicious look alighted on her rather pretty features. "Who are you anyway? I don't recognize you from the academy. I would have remembered your hair." Naruto chuckled as he leaned against a tree, his staff to the side for the time being. "I'm not from Suna, I'm just traveling, trying to learn everything I can about chakra." The other blonde blinked. Elemental manipulation, as far as she knew, was only used by shinobi. "So you're like a monk?" Naruto smiled warmly again, motioning to the staff, making her slightly embarrassed. I am a monk, this is part of my pilgrimage, the Suna Genin said, looking perplexed. She had only been with Naruto for a few minutes and already had more questions than answers. But don't monks just pray or meditate and stuff? Naruto slid down the tree to a cross-legged sitting position, not looking like he was going anywhere anytime soon. The girl joined him, seeing no reason not to, attempting to imitate his sitting position but only managing a loose facsimile. I think you're confusing us with priests. We don't pray. Naruto shook his head, thinking better of it. At least many of us don't. After all, everybody is entitled to their belief. Being a monk is more of a way of life than a faith. We simply take up the values of clean living, kindness, and peace. Don't you think you're a little young? You appear even younger than I am. Naruto just gave her an easy grin, which caught her off guard. She had expected her comment to rile him up slightly. Not that she had wanted to. Most people got annoyed when they were underestimated. As I previously stated, it's a way of life. There is no age limit, only that you understand what you are committing to. I myself am 11. The girl settled on, despite her skepticism. That was the age of a fourth-year academy student. My name is Naruto, by the way. The girl was pushed from her thoughts by a hand held out in front of her. After a moment of hesitation, she took it, shaking it once. Temari, Naruto said simply as Temari shifted into a more comfortable sitting position. It's not for everyone. Temari chuckled as she drew her legs beneath her, resting on one hand. The dusty ground seemingly unimportant to her. Temari enthusiastically nodded as she idly played with a leaf in her hands, concentrating for a moment as a tiny cut appeared where her fingers were holding it. Yeah, my father got me a battle fan when I graduated the academy, so I want to train with it and make him proud. My dream is to be like Pakura-sama, to be a strong kunoichi like her and make a name for myself. Naruto smiled, making a certain masked shinobi in Konoha sneeze. That is a good goal, I wish you luck. He stood up to leave, but Temari grabbed his arm, preventing him from leaving, causing him to arch an eyebrow. The other blonde looked down for a moment, seemingly conflicted about what she was about to say. Would you mind assisting me? Naruto blinked before suddenly laughing, causing the older blonde's face to become irritated. What's the big deal? Is it because I'm a kunoichi that you won't help me? Don't you realize how difficult it was to ask for help from someone 2 years your junior? Naruto paused, wiping away an imaginary tear as he straightened up, his hand apologetically waving. Sorry, it wasn't that. But I'm just amazed you're the second person who has asked me that since I arrived here. Of course, I'd be delighted to assist in any way I can. Oh, and the first person to seek my assistance was also a kunoichi, so don't use your gender to justify your rage. It's unsuitable. He knelt, picked up a leaf, and handed it to the girl before gently placing his hand around hers, causing the older girl to blush. What exactly are you doing? Naruto gave her a deceptive smile that made her relax slightly without her realizing it. I'd like you to try splitting the leaf. I'm going to see what you're doing. I can read your chakra through contact. Temari seemed unsure. She had heard of sensor ninja before but never ones that required contact. It seemed impractical. Still, she began to channel chakra into the leaf, doing her best to change it into wind nature based on what she had learned from a few older Genin and Chunin. Alright, I think I see your problem. Temari looked up before her face flushed as she noticed Naruto was still holding her hand, which the younger boy barely noticed as he was more focused on what he had felt and was looking off to the side. You should do it as soon as it is released, not too long before or after. Try it again, and keep that in mind. Trying hard not to blush, Temari accepted another leaf before repeating the technique. Temari was far more ecstatic as she saw the leaf split 3/4 of the way through. It was a rather rough, jagged cut, but it was a marked improvement. Naruto was pleasantly surprised as he felt her chakra begin to shift into a specific nature just before she released it into the leaf. Wow, that was incredible. With just one hint, I improved so much. She gave the younger blonde a gleaming grin, and suddenly Naruto found a tad more color in his cheeks. He had thought of Matsuri as cute before, but Temari was most certainly very pretty, and he was broken from his slight daze as he saw a hand waving in front of his face, and a confused Temari staring at his blank expression. Ooh yeah, that was really good, but you are letting your chakra build up before you release it. That can be quite dangerous when you are shifting the element. When you convert chakra to another element, it becomes more difficult to control because it is no longer entirely yours. You have opened it up to the element itself. You need to release it as a continuous flow, but this will come with practice. Temari smiled and nodded, almost ready to accept the blonde's words as gospel, but a frown appeared on her brow. How dangerous do you mean? Naruto considered how to describe it for a moment before looking up. Does performing a jutsu make you immune to its effects? Temari quickly shook her head in the negative. Her sensei had stressed that many more tactically minded shinobi would exploit their opponent's weaknesses. Well then, it's no different than the chakra that makes up the technique. While not impossible, controlling an unpredictable element like lightning or wind inside one's body is extremely difficult. Temari just nodded at the logic. She found Naruto to be a very good teacher. He found simple ways to explain things. Now, if you want to improve the smoothness of the cut, he picked up another leaf and split it quickly, holding it up to compare with Temari's. Imagine two of the finest swords scraping against each other, sharp and fine. Temari nodded again before grabbing a few leaves and retreating further into the training ground, while Naruto returned to his meditative position before retrieving one of the scrolls Matsuri had given him. A few hours passed as Naruto calmly continued to read his scroll about chakra. There wasn't much he didn't already know, but it was still interesting. During that time, he heard many cries of success as well as irritated shouts of frustration. In either case, they brought small smiles to his lips. He was sure Sora and Temari would have much to talk about, both being avid wind enthusiasts. He looked up to see Temari, a victorious and self-satisfied smile on her face as she held a leaf in front of her. She put it between both of her palms before gaining a look of intense concentration. After a few moments, she looked up and opened her palms. Between them, cut down the middle with a very wonky and jagged line, was the leaf. I finished it. Naruto returned Temari's beaming grin with a smaller, more reserved one of his own. That's fantastic. You improved really quickly, Temari said as she sat down next to the seated monk, snorting. Yeah, but I couldn't have gotten nearly this far without your assistance, Naruto admitted, grinning. All you have to do now is work on straightening your cut and doing it without having to concentrate so much, and you'll be ready to move on to the next stage. I'm sure your sensei will be surprised, Temari said, before looking across at the blonde with interest. Is there a next step? The younger blonde gave a small nod and began to draw a waterfall with the end of his shakuju. Yes, you have to split a waterfall with your chakra, Temari gulped as she saw Naruto draw a small stickman in the sand beneath the waterfall. This first stage was about control and precision. The next stage is about power and maintaining a steady, constant stream of wind chakra. Temari seemed daunted by such an imposing task, while Naruto appeared unconcerned. Oh, I've got to get home. She leapt to her feet and raced towards the training grounds entrance, but she abruptly turned and waved. Will I see you again? Naruto shrugged, a lopsided smile on his face. Hey, anything can happen, Temari said as he turned and ran back home, leaving an amused blonde to wonder how he got into these situations. It turned out Naruto did see Temari again, more than a few times because it was her training ground and Naruto didn't bother to move. But after the first day, there wasn't really much he could actively help her with besides a few pointers. They both gradually improved, Naruto slightly faster due to starting earlier, his better chakra control, and understanding the nature of wind chakra better thanks to his reading. He had recommended Temari read as well, but she was morbid. Temari brought her battle fan along about a week into their strange meetings. Naruto had no idea what to expect when the older blonde mentioned her battle fan. But he hadn't been expecting an enormous steel bar that was as tall as the girl herself. However, the girl had quite a bit of difficulty moving the enormous wind weapon. Suddenly, Naruto had something new to teach her. Temari gradually mastered the art of reinforcing her muscles with chakra as well as timing bursts of energy to increase the power behind her swings, and she was able to swing the large fan around as if it were made of paper like its more traditional counterparts. Thankfully, she heeded the blonde's advice and didn't mention the monk. It didn't change his opinion of the girl, as Temari had expected, because he believed that everyone was their own person, regardless of who their parents were. The older blonde was pleased by that, because normally people avoided her because she was the honored daughter of Yondaime-sama. Of course, there was another obvious reason why people avoided her, but it had nothing to do with her father. Naruto didn't neglect his time with Matsuri, but between her time at the academy and Temari's missions, he didn't see either as much as they both probably wanted. So far, the two had yet to meet thanks to some strategic planning on the blonde's part. He wasn't sure how the shinobi of the village or the Kazekage himself would react to him giving pointers or, in some cases, jutsu to the girls, especially since one was his daughter. One day, he was finishing up a scroll that captivated him. It described old Suna shinobi using techniques known as free-form wind manipulation, which used to be the highest caliber in that discipline. It involved saturating the area in wind chakra, which the shinobi would then directly control with their chakra. No hand seals were involved. However, due to the difficulty, large reserves required, and years of dedicated training required, it had been discontinued. Suddenly, he was interrupted by the arrival of a newcomer, a boy perhaps a year older than him with spiky brown hair and an almost perpetual scowl on his features, who made their way over to Temari, who had been dutifully practicing the leaf-cutting exercise but quickly hid the results behind her, not wanting anyone to find out a secret. Naruto heard the two speak in hushed but urgent tones before both raced off suddenly back towards the village. Knowing he wasn't going to get anything done now that he was curious, Naruto got up and followed after them quietly, once again silencing his shakuju. It didn't take Naruto long to lose them in the midst of Suna's winding streets and throngs of people. Continuing to walk in that direction, he soon found himself completely alone on the streets, which was odd because the sun was only just beginning to move past the horizon. More people should have been out. He eventually reached a small park enclosed on all sides by buildings. It was more of a strip of bare land really. Just a sandy space with no buildings. Naruto approached the boy, now able to pick out details. He had dull red hair, closer to brown, framing a set of teal-green eyes and pale white skin. Strange black rings around the boy's eyes that reminded the blonde of his own whisker marks, and the kanji for love was seemingly tattooed on the boy's forehead above his left eye in bright red. He was sitting cross-legged with his hands in his lap, almost lifelessly staring ahead into space, occasionally muttering something Naruto couldn't quite make out in a low gravelly tone. Slowly Naruto settled down into a seated position of his own across from the boy, neither saying anything for a while. After a minute or so Naruto closed his eyes, somewhat enjoying the perfect quiet that permeated the area. "What brings you here?" The other boy's voice finally shattered Naruto's comfortable silence, his grave voice sounding emotionless. This seemed like as good a place as any to meditate. It is rare to find such solitude in a village like this. The other boy looked up, bloodshot eyes, as if he hadn't slept in a long time. "People avoid me because they know better than to approach me. When they do, their blood stains my sand." Naruto looked up, his eyes opening slightly. He wasn't naive. He saw the redhead slowly push his chakra into the sand around them, absorbing it all in a meter radius. There was something familiar about the boy's chakra. The only way to describe it would be a less potent version of his own. "Why?" Gaara blinked once, his face still an emotionless mask. Naruto wasn't sure if this was due to his mindset or the thin layer of chakra covering his body. "Mother demands their blood, and doing so proves my existence." Naruto nodded slowly, as if accepting the statement at face value, which surprised the redhead only slightly. "Do you believe that killing proves your existence? That taking another person's life increases the value of your own?" The redhead growled sharply as the sands around him began to writhe violently, with the exception of a small circle around Naruto, which remained perfectly still. "If mother demands it, I must do as she says or else." The boy suddenly gripped his head right over the tattoo. He was obviously in pain as he began to mumble to himself in hushed, apologetic tones. As quickly as it seemed to stop, the boy looked back up, murder in his eyes as he glared at the blonde. That was the great thing about the Preta path. It wasn't like normal jutsu. The more energized he felt, and he could vent excess chakra directly into the ground, which of course had the added benefit of acting as a buffer to the other boy's chakra, making it more difficult for him to affect the sand. This silent, staring match as the two boys asserted their dominance without words lasted about another minute. "Mother says you're strong, and she wants to look into your eyes. She yells at me, 'Rip open your eyes.'" Naruto raised an eyebrow, curious as to who this mother was and how she was so well informed. Suddenly, long tendrils of sand lashed out at Naruto, clearly aiming to crush him into the ground. But as soon as they got within a certain distance of him, they fell limply to the ground, disintegrating into the lifeless sand grains they should be before being reflected by some sort of invisible barrier. "You are brave, but you cannot deny mother her longed for blood." The boy continued to launch attack after attack at Naruto, who stood perfectly still, concentrating on keeping his sand out of range. "You know, I don't even know what your name is," the other boy said as the sand began to sway more neutrally. "I am Gaara no Sabaku." Naruto chuckled as another useless sand whip fell to the ground around him. "What an appropriate moniker. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Could you please stop attacking me now?" It seemed Gaara saw the futility of his actions. Nothing he did could even faze the blonde. It unnerved the redhead. The only person who did not fear him like this was his father. The only difference was that Naruto's expression was warm while his father's was eternally cold. "Uzumaki, why don't you fear me?" For once, Gaara's voice lacked the bloodthirsty edge, and his words were filled with genuine curiosity. "What justification do I have?" The redhead blinked in surprise. The blonde was correct. None of his attacks had even come close to having any effect on him. "How do you stay so strong?" Naruto sighed, but the smile remained. He knew the boy in front of him was obviously anything but stable, and to let his guard down now would be foolish. He may have been kind and wanted to help the boy, but he was anything but an idiot. Kairaku had seen fit to beat that out of him quickly enough. That's a tough question to answer. Some may argue that it is due to circumstances beyond my control, or that it is in my blood. I like to think it's because I work hard to improve myself. Gaara shook his head, looking as if he was hungry. No. What motivates you? What gives you such strength? Naruto blinked before looking down and thought. Gaara took advantage of the opportunity to attack the blonde again, but his attempts were quickly repudiated. I want to understand. Gaara's attacks all came to a halt as the redhead re-examined Naruto. What exactly do you mean? Naruto raised his head, a kind smile on his face. I want to know and understand the world, people, and chakra. To do so, I need to get stronger. Understanding people is understanding the world, and it is only through understanding that we will achieve peace. I don't want to see people I care about hurt or suffer, so I have to understand in order to work for peace. Gaara looked down, his hair falling over his eyes as he seemed to ponder the words. Prove it to me. His words were nothing but a whisper, barely carried by the breeze over to Naruto. Prove to me that your method of gaining power is superior. I fight because I refuse to be erased from existence. Now show it to me. Fight with me, Uzumaki. Even as Naruto watched, the sand around Gaara began to congregate, drawing together as if by some unseen will. Naruto finally understood. The thin shell around Gaara's body had prevented him from seeing. But now, as the sand began to form into some misshapen creature, he could see it all too clearly. Gaara, like him, was a Jinchuriki. The signs were all there. Flowing through the sand was the same red chakra that Naruto and Sora once possessed. However, it was not as thick or potent as the Kyuubi's chakra, which was not surprising given that it had to be a less powerful Biju inside of him by default. Naruto sighed slowly. Right now he was looking into a mirror of what he might have been. It was also obvious his Biju was affected. I don't intend to fight you, Gaara. The redhead laughed maniacally, drool dripping from his extended mouth as his features began to resemble those of a raccoon. Naruto had done his research since discovering his status as a Jinchuriki, and what he was looking at was the vessel of the Ikabai no Tanuki, the One Tail. It's not your decision. Mother now wishes for your blood. Naruto knew this was a problem. Gaara had started leaking off his Biju's chakra in droves, and he was doing his best to absorb it from the air. But he knew it was only a matter of time before this was investigated, which meant he had to make this quick. Very well, I am sorry then, Naruto said calmly, raising a single hand as Gaara's long sandy tail swayed menacingly, the point sharpened in preparation of impaling the blonde. Naruto opened his eyes fully for quite possibly the first time since arriving in Sunagakure no Sato, but Gaara wasn't paying attention, and one of the rings around his eyes contracted slightly as a rush of intense chakra moved through his body. Shinra Tensei. He didn't even shout the name of the technique, so Gaara was all the more oblivious as he was suddenly struck by an incredible, invisible force. His feet remained firmly stuck to the ground by chakra he had already been channeling, but a great deal of his protective sand layer had been blown off, exposing Gaara's body. Banshu Tenon, focusing on the small red head as opposed to the massive sand recongregating on his body, Naruto gently pulled his hand back an inch. The effect was immediate as Gaara suddenly flew forward, his eyes wide in shock as his sand cloak was left where it was, twitching slightly in confusion. This confusion meant he could do nothing, nor could his sand react fast enough as he suddenly found himself being held up by Naruto in one hand. The blonde abruptly dropped the terrified redhead, leaving him sprawled out on the ground, his eyes fearfully looking up at Naruto. It only lasted a second before Naruto gently pressed the end of his staff against the Jinchuriki's forehead. Immediately Gaara discovered he couldn't move. His entire body was paralyzed. He couldn't even move his eyes or speak. I am not going to hurt you, Gaara, but at the same time I cannot allow you to hurt me. Don't worry, this paralysis will wear off in about an hour, or I can release it myself if you promise to calm down. Surprisingly, there was no hint of patronization in his voice, and his expression only spoke of genuine concern. Gaara had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Here, this boy could end his life with less effort than scraping dirt from his sandal. And Gaara didn't even have his sand armor. Why? Naruto paused for a moment before rising, the sand swarming to him and congealing back into his ultimate defense. Because we share a common burden, and I know better than anyone that you don't deserve any more suffering. Asuna Shinobi dropped down from a nearby rooftop, looking hesitantly at Gaara and suspiciously at Naruto. Gaara, you will go see your father right away. The redhead looked at the man for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly before widening in surprise. Naruto had placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, the sand falling away harmlessly at his touch. His automatic defense hadn't even quivered at the blonde's approach, and for the first time in his entire life Gaara felt the warmth of human contact. When he was gone, Naruto turned his attention to the older shinobi who had interrupted. A tall man dressed in the standard Suna Jounin garb with the addition of a white linen veil covering half of his face. In turn, the man glared at the monk, trying to ascertain his motives and understand exactly what he had just done. Finally, with a curt nod, the man gestured after Gaara's retreating form. "I believe the Kazekage will want to speak with you as well," Naruto said calmly before motioning for the man to lead the way, which he did after a small frown crossed his features. The two moved at a reasonable pace through the still quiet streets of Suna, Naruto's staff jingling with each step. The Jounin accompanying him cast him glances every now and then, checking to see if he was still there or for some other reason the blonde wasn't sure of. Naruto was thinking about what the Kazekage might talk to him about, or what he wanted to say to the Kazekage. "So, what took you so long?" "You know, when my chakra touched Gaara's, I could sense everything his sand was connected to, including you hiding up on the rooftop." The blonde's voice cut through the evening air like a knife, shattering the uneasy silence that had settled there despite his warm tone. The shinobi just looked down at him for a moment before looking ahead, either ignoring the monk or confused by his words. "I'm not sure what you mean." Naruto ignored the remark. He had definitely felt the Jounin hiding up on the rooftop since Gaara began to partially transform. "I wonder if you were under orders not to interfere." They kept walking at the same steady pace, but Naruto's glances became less frequent. "Perhaps you were curious. It is a rather fundamental human desire to know more." He got no reaction from the stoic Jounin as they continued to lazily wind through the streets. "Perhaps you were simply afraid, although of what I am not sure. When you lived in a compound full of people all wearing the same thing and most having shaved heads, it was helpful to know so you could identify people. There was also the fact that monks tended to be rather calm and collected people, and for Naruto to annoy someone he had to know what they were feigning." Naruto wasn't sure why they had taken such a slow, civilian pace. He could easily jump across rooftops like shinobi. Using chakra to enhance one's muscles to run faster and jump higher as well as using it to stick to surfaces was pretty basic. It was part of the process of controlling the chakra running through one's body. He put it down to the shinobi underestimating him, not knowing about his skills, or not wanting Naruto to know that he knew about his skills. Either way, the monk was fairly content to just amble on besides the man. They were in a part of Suna Naruto hadn't been around much, so it was nice to take it all in while the streets were quiet like this. "My name is Naruto, by the way." The Jounin turned around briefly, staring at the blonde with narrowed eyes for a few seconds before turning back around. "Baki." It was more of a grunt than a word, but it was clear the man didn't enjoy Naruto's company. The blonde simply raised a brow, so this was Temari's sensei. Finally, the pair made it to probably the largest building in Suna, the enormous spherical structure bearing the kanji for wind that told Naruto it was the Kazekage Tower, at least if things worked the same here as they did in. With a smile, Naruto quickly followed Baki through the various corridors and stairs of the large structure, somewhere towards the middle. Naruto assumed it was to make protecting the Kazekage easier, more walls between him and potential threats. The idea seemed laughable to Naruto. The cage was supposed to be the strongest in the village, wasn't he? "There are no weapons in the Kazekage office." She reached out to take it, but Naruto slightly retracted his hand, making Baki and the other shinobi hidden in the shadows tense. "I wouldn't touch her if I were you. She's a little temperamental about who holds her." The assistant looked at him incredulously for a moment before relaxing as Naruto simply set the long staff against a wall. He had given the warning. What happened after that was not his concern. He was quickly patted down to make sure he wasn't carrying any more weapons, which made the blonde roll his eyes, not that anyone could see. "You can go in now," Naruto said amicably to the woman before following Baki into the room. Naruto had to admit the room itself was rather nice. The walls were painted a calming violet with various pictures across the walls, mostly scenery shots of Suna and the surrounding desert. The revelation that Temari was the Jinchuriki's sister came as a bit of a surprise. She had never even mentioned a brother. "Kazekage-sama, I'm honored you would call for me," the man said, his eyes taking in Naruto's form without missing a single detail, his gaze hovering over the blonde's narrowed eyes for a moment before turning to Baki, who had taken up a rigid position in the corner of the room. "You didn't mention the boy was a monk." Baki gulped subtly, but the action was obvious to everyone in the room. "Please accept my apologies, Kazekage-sama," the powerful man said, before returning his gaze to the blonde in front of him. "What is your connection to my son?" Naruto blinked at the directness of the question. Then again, this was hardly a meeting between Kage or daimyo where subtleties were traded like kunai on a battlefield, and Naruto was nothing more than a monk with some interesting abilities in the eyes of the Keisuke. I have no more interest in your son Keisuke-sama than I do in any other person with whom we can exchange polite conversation and even words of wisdom, the man said, his brows raised slightly. The blonde's words were smooth, and the man detected no hint of deception. What prompted you to approach him in the first place? Naruto smiled warmly again, his eyes as narrowed as before. I saw a boy my own age alone in a park, and like any inquisitive person, I wanted to understand why he was alone. The Keisuke was once again pleasantly surprised by the slick answer. The blonde appeared to answer honestly, but his words were vague. Would you have approached the boy if you had known he had killed multiple times? To the man's surprise, Naruto didn't even flinch, seeming no more concerned than if he had told him Gaara's hobby was cultivating cacti. It is unfortunate the events that lead to a man killing. Yet condemning him before you attempt to understand why a man does what he does is just as bad as allowing him to perform the deed itself. The Keisuke again raised a brow as he detected what could have been a jab at his abilities to watch over his son, yet the monk's words hid that well. Anyway, from what I saw, Gaara's sand acts in self-defense or in the presence of what he perceives as a threat. Am I right? When the Keisuke did not respond, Naruto took it as a yes. Plus, I don't think you can truly blame him. I'm sure I'd be tightly wound if I had an 8-story tanuki whispering in my ear all day. Everyone in the room tensed, except Naruto, as the ruler of Suna continued to observe him closely, finding the monk increasingly interested. And what exactly do you mean? Naruto chuckled slightly, noticing Baki, on the outskirts of his vision, narrow his eyes at the perceived lack of respect. Please, Keisuke-sama, I may be young, but I am not naive. This is not my first encounter with a Jinchuriki. That wasn't entirely a lie. Sora was technically one. From his attacks and the fact that we are in the desert makes it likely that he contains the Ikabai no Tanuki. Keisuke seemed impressed, for one so young to make such an astute observation, about such a rare subject no less. And does knowing this change your opinion of him? Naruto finally displayed an emotion other than calm serenity when he raised an eyebrow in amusement. As far as I know, drawing a storage seal on one's stomach does not turn them into a kunai, the Keisuke said, leaning forward in his chair, his fingers steepled as he looked at Naruto intently. I suppose you are correct, young monk, Naruto said with a slightly exaggerated nod that made the man in front of him amused rather than angry. If I may, Keisuke, the spiky-haired man said curtly after a few more seconds of intense staring. There was silence in the office for a few moments as the man seemed to consider his response, that, or he enjoyed making people wait to assert his dominance, neither of which would have surprised Naruto based on what he had seen so far. Gaara is a shinobi of this village, and he will remain so until his usefulness as a weapon to protect this village dwindles. I have no reason to tell you anything else, monk. You could be a spy, most likely from Konoha, with that fire emblem on your robes. You are only standing here because of my grace and curiosity. Many have never received the honor, and will never receive it. Naruto just smiled, outwardly unconcerned by the information, inwardly bored by the back and forth. The temple had tempered him, but he was still an 11-year-old, and politics would only interest him as long as it was relevant. I am from the Fire Temple in Hai no Kuni, and I proudly wear this symbol to honor both my home and my master, just as any shinobi proudly wears the symbol for his village on his headband. The Keisuke merely nodded absently with a dismissive flick of his hand, which irritated Naruto because he would have thought a Kage of all people would understand the importance of a symbol. In any case, I want you to keep your distance from my son. If my shinobi sees you approaching him, I will not hesitate to expel you from my village. Have you understood, monk of Hai no Kuni? The blonde cocked his head slightly, his smile widening slightly, unsettling the jounin in the corner at how calm someone so young could be in the presence of a Kage. Of course, Keisuke-sama, the Suna leader said as his gaze returned to the paperwork on his desk. As Naruto approached the door, the man called out in a calm and perfectly level voice, not even looking up from his work. That includes my daughter Naruto Uzumaki, the blonde said, pausing for a fraction of a second, causing the Keisuke to smirk slightly. Outside the office, Naruto and Baki discovered a strange sight. The assistant lay sprawled out on the ground, softly snoring, sweat covering her body. Naruto's Shakuju lay to the side of her, thankfully not touching her, as did a Tsunachunin in a similar state. The rest of the people in the room were staring at the simple wooden staff as if it were cursed, while Naruto simply sighed deeply. I told her she was temperamental. Nobody ever just takes my word for it. Without another word, he reached forward and picked up the staff, raising a brow at the collective intake of breath from the others in the room. However, when Naruto didn't even seem concerned by the demon Shakuju, he got a few strange looks before everybody cautiously returned to what they were doing. Naruto had never seen a room clear so quickly before, the people looking terrified of the young Jinchuriki as they hurried from the room, a few even shooting Naruto pitying looks even as they themselves fled from Gaara's sight. Naruto noticed the boy now supported a large gourd on his back, which he could see was laced with incredible amounts of chakra, while Baki watched from the side. Surprisingly, Gaara walked into the building with a slight inclination of his head and slightly narrowed eyes, and both Naruto and Baki raised an eyebrow. But it was the Jounin who let out a small sigh of relief. The wind user would never admit it to anyone, but Gaara scared him, and the only people who weren't scared of the Jinchuriki were his father due to his ability to suppress Shukaku, and Naruto, who simply seemed none. Baki noticed Naruto was staring at him oddly before remembering why he was still here, and motioned with his hand for the blonde to follow him, which Naruto did after giving a small but warm smile. Baki continued to watch him as they left. It was just unnatural. The next few days were rather amusing for the blonde. The Kazekage had seen fit to reward him with an entourage. From the shadows, of course. The blonde had finally been allowed to let his prankster side out a little after suppressing it for far too long. He rather enjoyed the memories he got every night as his shadow clone would dispel. They varied from wandering around the village to hours of meditation. But that wasn't the point. Meanwhile, Naruto would continue to go to his remote training ground to read and occasionally train Matsuri in whatever she asked of him, as long as he believed she wouldn't hurt herself. She remained an attentive and diligent pupil, soaking up information and instructions with enthusiasm and determination, and he honestly believed she was a better shinobi than the fools chasing around a clone all day without a clue. He knew what it was like to be underestimated, and it irritated him to no end, usually because of his height or age. But he also knew when such things were useful, and now was one of those times. Nobody expected him to be able to form fully functioning and solid clones, and if they did suspect, the fact that he could maintain it all day convinced them otherwise. It should have been an impossible feat for a normal 11-year-old. He got that from Matsuri who, of course, Naruto was not your typical 11-year-old. Strangely, he wasn't met in his training ground by Matsuri, or even Temari, though he expected the girl had been warned away from him by her father, and he felt his chakra in the sand beneath him intruded upon long before Gaara even came into view. It made him wonder just how unstable the young Jinchuriki was if people weren't even willing to watch the village weapon. Uzumaki, Naruto said with a small inclination of his head as Gaara sat down opposite him, about 5 meters apart. Despite Naruto's warm smile and Gaara's contemplative silence, the atmosphere was slightly tense. Both boys were wary of the other's power. Gaara. There was another moment of silence as Naruto maintained his meditative pose and Gaara just stared at him. If the blonde hadn't been so well controlled, he might have found it creepy, but he knew Gaara was simply socially awkward through no fault of his own. Why did you inquire about me with the Kazekage? Naruto raised an eyebrow when Gaara refused to refer to the man as his father, but given how the man felt about his son, he shouldn't have been surprised that they didn't have a healthy father-son relationship. Because, as I said, I want to understand you. Gaara narrowed his eyes, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. What did you mean by we share a burden? Naruto simply smiled, but with his staff, he began to draw out the kanji for 9 with his shakuju almost absently. Gaara just observed with his usual emotionless facade, but the blonde did notice his eyes widen for a fraction of a second. So that's why you're so powerful, Naruto said with a small chuckle, his eyes crinkling even more than usual. I'm aware of your ability to sense people's chakras through your sand. Did I use any that wasn't my own? To anyone outside the conversation, the question would appear rather inane, so Gaara simply remained silent while he pondered it. So, what is it? I need to know so I can weigh your existence against mine. Naruto sighed as he rose to his feet, his face losing the slightly phony serene smile as he looked to the ground. As I've already stated, Gaara, I am strong because I cannot afford not to be. There are people I value, and if I fail to protect them, whether by losing my life or failing to find the peace that would bring them safety, I have failed not only myself, but them as well. I carry their hopes on my shoulders alongside my own, and it is a burden I gladly bear, and would never let go. Gaara continued to stare at him, the sand rising up around him to push him into a standing position. So you fight for those you care about, for those you love. The concept seemed alien to the redhead, even as he said it as if he didn't quite understand it. So, Gaara, the Ikigai Jinchuriki looked up to see Naruto staring at him, his staff in one hand and the other hanging loosely by his side. Do you intend to fight me? Naruto could already feel the sand beneath him writhing, whether with or without Gaara's permission. The Biju within him seemed incredibly eager to fight. And no, Gaara said, sounding unsure, as if he doubted his own voice, and Naruto only offered him a small friendly smile as he returned to a seated position. Good. He could now see the intense emotions running through Gaara's mind as his emotionless mask dropped, shattered like his sand armor. It was obvious the boy felt incredibly conflicted, but Naruto couldn't be sure if that was within himself or with his Biju. He would grip his head as if in great pain, but it seemed he was fighting it, refusing the voice that had preyed on his fears and desires from a young age. How do you want to sleep, Gaara? The redhead looked up, surprise and shock visible in his wide, bloodshot eyes. That's right, the voice keeps you awake, isn't it? No, that's not it, you're afraid of falling asleep. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly as he saw another flicker of emotion dance across the boy's face. Finally, the blonde understood as a sympathetic gleam reached his eyes, smiling sadly at his fellow Jinchuriki. Isn't that it, though? You aren't as uncaring as you try to appear. If you were, you'd have no problem going to sleep and relinquishing control to the Ikabai. Naruto stood up and walked towards Gaara slowly, gently crouching down in front of the boy before placing a hand on his shoulder. Gaara saw it coming this time but still flinched at the contact he wasn't used to. Remember, Gaara, if you live only for yourself, you will die alone. He extended a hand to his fellow container, who simply stared at the appendage as if it were offered by an incomprehensible alien life form. Could you find a way to let me sleep? Naruto only smiled as he closed the gap and clasped Gaara's hand in his own. I promise, and I never break my promises, Gaara said, before offering the first weak smile he had given since his uncle's deaths. Thank you, Yuzum. He blinked quickly before tightening his grip on the blonde's hand and staring into his eyes. Thank you, Naruto, the blonde simply smiled. Naruto sat quietly in his usual meditative position, his back against a tall tree in a clearing not far from the edge of the forest he was in. It had been 6 days since his departure from Suna, and in that time he had crossed the deserts back towards Hai no Kuni before camping out in a forest on the border of Kase no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. So my esteemed jailer returns. I had begun to think you had forgotten me, the giant fox said, to which the only response was a light chuckle and a small jingle that froze the Biju in place. You say it as if I'll ever forget the very large and very angry fox in my stomach, the blonde said, raising an eyebrow at the fox. Speaking of which, did you get big? Vinjin, stop your meaningless speech. What store did you get that staff from? As it spoke, the Kyuubi leaned down, getting as close to the bars as it could without pressing up against them as it could. Naruto looked down at the staff, surprised for a moment that it had followed him into the seal. It had become such an integral part of his day that he shouldn't be too surprised. He almost always had it on hand now. It was a gift from Master Chukaku. Realization dawned across the blonde's features as he suddenly looked up at the Kyuubi with a smirk. But you recognize it because it was the sage's, don't you? He chuckled slightly to himself. At the very least, it confirmed the temple's claims about its origins. The fox simply growled, a deep low sound that caused Naruto's robes to flutter slightly in the breeze it created. How dare you hold that staff so carelessly? Naruto was frightened for the first time. The Kyuubi had always been menacing, but for the first time Naruto really felt the hatred coating his words, aimed directly at him. How dare you lay a hand on anything he touched, Ninjin? Naruto tried to remain calm in the face of this new side of the Kyuubi, offering his usual serene smile, albeit slightly strained. You know it's unhealthy to cling to the past so tenaciously. It's better to cherish memories than cling to them desperately. The fox's great eyes narrowed as its claws began scraping at the bars separating them. Your preaching might work on Shukaku's container, but your meaningless words are nothing but wind in my ears. Naruto looked up, surprised, as the fox returned to its somewhat normal, cold disposition, the staff forgotten for now. I could feel that pitiful Tanuki's presence before you even saw that boy. Naruto held his breath for a moment, the Kyuubi's words making sense at the very least. That's an odd way to address your kin, he replied with a loud and rather vicious snort that caused him to crinkle his nose slightly. The Kyuubi had never been this close before, and up close, his breath was not the most pleasant experience on Naruto's senses. The rest of my kind are beneath my notice, barely worth the attention their meaningless existences bring, Naruto remarked, puzzled as to how anyone could be so callous about family. Perhaps you should be thankful you have family at all, grunted the fox, baring his teeth to express his displeasure. The moment I begin calling those weaklings my family, that is the moment I admit you are worthy of respect. The Kyuubi obviously didn't think that was going to happen. Naruto simply tapped the side of his head with the shakuju, causing the Kyuubi to flinch too subtly to see. You know, you don't look all that powerful yourself behind these bars, you know, the great fox said, his glistening white teeth showing as its lips drew back. I am a far more powerful being than you can ever imagine. I am pure chakra given consciousness, power incarnate. Naruto simply grinned at the fox, causing it to pause for a moment. So you're really made of chakra. Good to know. And with that, the blonde abruptly faded from the seal. The Kyuubi laying back down, not bothering to walk back into the darkness of the cell this time as a frown took residence on its brow. Naruto opened his eyes as someone walked into the clearing, the ground beneath his feet twitching in a familiar way. It's good to see you made it, Gaara. The redhead was wearing his usual emotionless mask, which Naruto didn't mind because it would take more than a few days to restore Gaara's normalcy. It wasn't all that difficult to leave the village, Naruto said, raising an eyebrow. He knew Gaara was powerful, if not in general, then at least for his age. But leaving a shinobi village should never be that simple, especially coming from the boy who walked straight out of Konoha. Sometimes he wondered what those guards were up to that night. The village and its walls are built on and from sand, he explained, so Naruto just shrugged. It hadn't taken much for Gaara to leave the village. He didn't particularly care for anything there. He had no relationships with his family, the people hated and feared him, and his own father had ordered his assassination countless times. It hadn't even taken a second thought for the sand-wielding Jinchuriki. Naruto remembered how Matsuri had looked when he told the girl he was leaving. He had never seen a more heartbroken look before, and she had actually offered to come with him. And honestly, the blonde was touched. He was sure that with enough time and planning, he could have gotten the girl out of Suna, but she was in the academy. And while she was not a shinobi, she would still be labeled as a missing nin due to her knowledge of certain. He never saw Temari again, which was a shame. Even so, he believed he would see her again. Finally, he left his thoughts behind as he looked up at Gaara, his eyes twinkling at the challenge before him. All right, Gaara, let's get this party started.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.